Hello and welcome, I am Thomas Porteous and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. CIA Director John Ratcliffe says US strikes severely damaged Iran's nuclear sites and set the program back years. His statement clashes with a leaked Pentagon report that downplayed the damage, a report that infuriated President Donald Trump. NATO leaders agree to raise defence spending to 5% of GDP, delivering on a core demand from US President Donald Trump. Allies also reaffirm their mutual defence pledge as Trump slams Spain and Macron links the move to trade tensions. President Trump says the US talks with Iran will begin next week, aimed at ending Tehran's nuclear ambitions. He claims American strikes severely damaged Iran's program and brought a swift end to the Israel-Iran conflict. EU leaders are poised to back a quick trade deal with the US, even if it means accepting less favourable terms from Washington. Officials say most prefer to strike now and then offset the imbalance later with targeted rebalancing measures. President Trump urges Israel to pardon Prime Minister Netanyahu or cancel his corruption trial, calling him a great hero. Netanyahu faces bribery and fraud charges from 2019, which he denies. Trump claims the US saved him just as it saved Israel. China adds new controls on fentanyl precursors and boosts anti-drug measures amid US pressure to curb opioid trafficking. Trump slapped 20% tariffs on Chinese goods in February, blaming Beijing for failing to stem a crisis that's killed 450,000 Americans. A deadly landslide strikes Antigua province, killing at least 10 and injuring 15, according to Governor Andres Julien. Rescue crews continue search operations as authorities fear more victims may be trapped. Sean Diddy Coombs' high-profile trial enters closing arguments after weeks of intense testimony in a case that's gripped the US entertainment world. Jurors will soon decide his fate on sex trafficking charges that could end his decades-long career. The US has said Iran's nuclear program was severely damaged, yet 400 kg enriched uranium may have been hidden before more strikes hit key sites. Fordow, Natanz, Isfahan. The CIA confirms facilities destroyed. Rebuilding could take years, but Iran's advanced centrifuges remain a concern for global security experts. Tehran, however, denies weapon ambitions and claims uranium was moved early. The IAEA also demands access to verify stockpiles and infrastructure status. US President Donald Trump credits strikes for halting the war and hints at diplomacy with Iran, with next week's talks seeking to end Iran's enrichment. Israel says strikes delayed Iran's nuclear weapons path by years, but Iran vows to continue nuclear activity undeterred. Meanwhile, Iranians and Israelis return to normalcy, exhausted but unsure if true peace or more tension lies ahead. US intelligence still can't trace relocated uranium. Fears grow over possible secret stockpiles and future enrichment. The IAEA's Grossi calls for long-term strategy over short-term assessments, stressing cooperation and inspection urgency. Trump has also ruled out regime change, but warns against Iran of rebuilding a nuclear program, promising military action if it resumes. Iranian President Pezeshkian sees crisis as a chance for reform, while executions and arrests show the regime's tightened grip. We're now joined by our guest, Shruti Das Gupta, an international affairs expert located in New Delhi. Thank you very much, Shruti, for joining us on the programme. I want to get on to fears that the US hasn't, in fact, quote, obliterated Iran's nuclear program, and the possibilities that Iran may have moved crucial nuclear elements somewhere else, an unknown location. Does this risk an underground nuclear program, not regulated, not inspected? What are your thoughts on this?
From New Delhi, and my concerns are very valid, as you've just stated, that the enriched uranium was moved. It was moved, if I look at it, for many reasons. One, because its location was known. So if a strike on that happened via Israeli bombs, it would have led to a nuclear radiation leak and chemical poisoning of the land. So Iran's move to hide it was a way of survival as well. But beyond that, the minute it was moved during the war scenario that happened, the 12-day war scenario that happened, it also led to the fact that IAEA no longer has visibility of that material. So nobody in the world knows what is Iran doing with it now. Now, if I go beyond just the material itself, I would like to say that Iran has plans, okay? It has nuclear enrichment plans, it has techniques, it has know-hows, it has blueprints of weapons. Since 1979, US has been trying to limit the missile capability of Iran through various sanctions, independent sanctions, and they were unable to do so till date, right? So as a result, we found that Iran has the know-how, it has the technology to ensure that if it does empower a weapon, it can be lethal to the rest of humanity. Beyond this, so Iran has the capability, but as of now, we know that a lot of its top nuclear scientists were neutralized by Israel during these 12 days. Also, its facilities were hit. Now, these facilities were hit by bunker busters. So as a result, even though you cannot see like a full-on blast of sorts over the ground, they went inside and did enough damage that the facility can no longer be safely used. So the concerns of CIA may be misrepresented when they are said that the facilities exist. Of course, the facilities exist, but they may not be completely usable. So I'm I'm hedging my best towards that Iran can, as of now, not do something big, but it has the capability and technical know-how if it is given a chance to restart the program.
Shruti, I just wanted to reiterate to our viewers that these reports of the movement of uranium have not been confirmed specifically. There are fears, there are these images that we see of these trucks leaving, in particular the Fordo base prior to the strikes. However, these haven't been confirmed. I also want to talk about regime change. That was a big topic for Netanyahu. Donald Trump reportedly vetoed a plan to kill the Ayatollah Khomeini earlier on in the war. How do you see this regime moving forward? Iran have said that the regime will be stronger coming out of this crisis. What are your thoughts on the future of the Iranian regime?
Well, the Iranian regime is very fragile right now. They have executed they've arrested 20 people on suspicions of assisting Israel and Mossad. Their own nationals, by the way, not Israeli nationals. And they've executed, if I know correctly, 3 plus 3, so a total of 6 people in the last few hours itself on suspicion of assisting Israel during these 12 days of war. So the regime is trying to stifle dissent, which might come in any form via protests or others. And we know that it is not a very popular regime. It was, at least before these 12 days, it wasn't popular because of its very restrictive religious restrictions that it had placed. And we know that at least 50% of its mosques were empty. People were not willing to listen to these imams pontificate on religious diktats that were no longer viable in the modern world. So, and 70% of people were not happy with the kind of lives that they were living under that regime. Of course, there is still, now with the war with Israel, there has been a renewed support for the regime. And this ceasefire may help the regime come back on its feet, while staying favorable to these people who now find their nationalism being questioned. So they might find feet again. But the regime change that both US and Israel were flirting with, where they were probably trying to prop up the descendant of Shah of Iran, Reza
Yes.
Pahlavi. And they were probably looking to see if that man found popularity. But putting somebody from outside would be bad optics. So I think, in my analysis, they would probably wait for a people-powered movement to make sure that the change comes from the ground itself, and the people, whoever Israel or US put their stamp of approval on, also have the stamp of approval of the local elites. So I'm pretty sure as of now, the regime change is only in Israel's mind. America knows you cannot force a nation to accept a new leader just because US says so. So as of now, I don't think US has it, but it is a long-term plan of Israel, because until and unless the regime change happens, and mind you, this current regime is a regime that hates, I'm using that word very, very specifically, hates the Israeli regime. Okay, they do not like its
Yes.
existence in Middle East.
Sure.
And so I find it that Israel will continue its effort to try and ensure that a regime change happens there.
Shruti, one final point. Diplomacy is on Trump's mind once again, and he's hinted at talks next week with Iran in regards to their nuclear program. What leverage does the US now have? Sanctions, military threat, or actual compromise, do you think, is coming here?
Well, the JCPOA was unilaterally negated by US, but the others of the P5+1 that were there, they still continued to operate under that JCPOA. And when in 2020 US tried to reiterate sanctions on on Iran, they the others did not agree with them. They did not want to be part of a set of new sanctions on Iran. So now with this war, from what I understand, even President Macron wants everybody on the table of diplomacy, have new nuclear restrictions placed on Iran, and they want it to happen before October of this year, 2025, because on October of 2025, the JCPOA's restrictions on enrichment and its usage of Fordo and other facilities and reconstruction of those facilities will become legalized. As of now, it was an illegal plan that was working. They were not allowed to use Fordo. Only Natanz centrifuge, and which was of older capability, was allowed, and only up to 3% of enrichment. So obviously there have been a lot of red lines crossed by Iran, and everybody wants to get them back on the table, because as I've stated earlier, they have the know-how, they have the technology, they have the strategy to develop into a nuclear power. And this is a fear that the West has. Once it does gain nuclear power, Iran will be uncontrollable. So it is something for the people in the movers and shakers of the powers of corridors to go forth and ensure that Iran is again brought to the table and made to sign on a deal and follow the letter of that deal. We found that it signs a deal, but it doesn't kind of obey it completely. So it's an iffy position right now.
Shruti, thank you very much for joining us. Just to provide some balance, Iran does say that its nuclear ambitions are merely peaceful. We have some breaking news coming in. Russian airstrikes have killed one person and wounded 2 others in Ukraine's southern region of Kherson. Reports suggest that guided bombs hit a residential building, wounding another man who is 34 years old. We will bring you all news updates we can on that ongoing and developing situation there, as we can see the visuals. We move over to the United States for our next story, where US President Donald Trump has weighed in on ending the Israel-Hamas war in Gaza as a new ceasefire push begins more than 20 months after the conflict started. Here's what he had to say.
Progress is being made on Gaza. I think because of this attack that we made, I think we're going to have some very good news.
Opposition politicians, relatives of hostages held in Gaza, and even members of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's ruling coalition are increasing their pressure on him to end the fighting triggered by Hamas's October the 7th attack. Now, in a related development, US President Donald Trump has come out in support of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, saying that his ongoing trial should be stopped. In a long post on his social media platform, Truth Social, Trump said the charges against Netanyahu are politically motivated and unfair. Trump said he is shocked that Netanyahu is still facing trial, particularly after the Israel-Iran 12-day conflict that he described as one of Israel's greatest moments. He further praised Netanyahu's leadership and called him a warrior who helped fight Iran. Trump criticized the Israeli legal system for continuing what he called a horror show of a trial. Netanyahu has been under investigation since 2020. Netanyahu is accused of accepting tens of thousands of dollars worth of cigars and champagne from a billionaire Hollywood producer in exchange for helping him with business interests. He is also charged with advocating for advantageous regulations for media tycoons in return for positive publicity for himself and his family. Now we move back to Europe. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has signed an agreement with the Council of Europe's human rights bodies to establish a special tribunal. This tribunal will prosecute top Russian officials responsible for the crime of aggression in the invasion of Ukraine. Let's hear what Secretary General of the Council of Europe had to say.
Ukraine and the Council of Europe are signing an agreement to establish the special tribunal for the crime of aggression. Tribunal to judge between victims and aggressors, between impunity and accountability, because without accountability there can be no lasting peace for Ukraine and Europe.
Zelensky urged justice and accountability over Russian crimes of aggression. Let's hear what Zelensky had to say about Putin.
Today's agreement to create the tribunal is just the beginning, and now we must take real steps to make it work. And it will take strong political and legal cooperation to make sure every Russian war criminal faces justice, including Putin.
Meanwhile, US President Trump said he'll speak with Putin as soon as Zelensky wants to end the war. Trump may send more Patriot missiles to Ukraine after meeting with the Ukrainian president at the NATO summit. This marks a historic move, as it would be the first time the Council of Europe has set up such a tribunal. While the location of the tribunal has not yet been determined, the Council of Europe, which includes 46 member states such as Ukraine, Turkey and the United Kingdom, has made it clear that this body will focus on prosecuting senior leaders for their role in the invasion. Russia, expelled from the Council following the special military operation, as it calls it, is not part of this process. Analysts say this tribunal addresses a critical gap, filling in the jurisdictional limits of the International Criminal Court, ensuring accountability for those at the highest levels of leadership. Now let's turn over to South America, where at least 11 people have been killed in a landslide in northwestern Colombia. This comes after heavy rains unleashed the wall of mud and debris on crowded neighborhoods and buried some dozen homes. Rescue workers continue to dig through the rubble and search for survivors in Colombia's second largest city of Medellin and the nearby mountainous town of Bello, where at least 15 people remain missing, as per reports from the region. Authorities in Bello swiftly transformed schools and community centres, even a swimming pool, into shelters that quickly filled with over 1,300 people who lost or couldn't access their homes as a result of flooding. Landslides are common in this verdant area of Colombia, especially during the rainy season from April to November, when downpours loosen the soil. Floodwaters from almost 2 consecutive days of torrential downfall caused streams to overflow yesterday, while most residents were sleeping. The flood surged through cities, carrying tons of debris and sweeping away cars and other personal belongings. Now let's move back to the United States, where President Trump has fiercely criticized Indian origin candidate Zohran Mamdani after his victory in New York City's Democratic mayoral primary. Trump called Mamdani a 100% communist lunatic and blamed the Democrats for taking the party too far left. Trump posted on his Truth Social account that Mamdani, a 33-year-old self-proclaimed democratic socialist, is part of a radical left wing. He insulted Mamdani's appearance and intelligence, saying he looks terrible and has a grating voice and is not very smart. Trump targeted progressive leaders supporting Zohran Mamdani, calling AOC and others dummies and accusing Senator Chuck Schumer of groveling over him. He referred to Schumer as our great Palestinian senator, crying Chuck. Trump also mocked the Democrats, suggesting they nominate Jasmine Crockett for president and AOC for vice president, calling Crockett low IQ. He warned that with progressives rising, the country is really screwed, and blamed Democrats for their 2024 election loss. This statement came shortly after former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo conceded the race, making Mamdani the likely next mayor of New York City. US President Trump has said Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth will hold a major Pentagon briefing on Thursday to defend US strikes on Iran's nuclear sites. Trump insists Iran's facilities were completely obliterated, rejecting leaked intelligence suggesting only temporary setbacks of a few months. A CNN report cites officials saying centrifuges remain mostly intact and enriched uranium was likely moved before the attack. Trump dismissed the DIA's findings, saying US intelligence lacks full visibility and his assessment is based on classified data. He called the assault devastating and says the press conference will offer irrefutable proof to support that view. The strike came days after Israeli attacks on Iran, triggering an Iranian counteroffensive targeting Israeli infrastructure. Now we move over to the Indo-Pacific, where defense ministers of Shanghai Cooperation Organization member states, including Iranian Defense Minister Brigadier General Amir Nazir Zadeh, have gathered for a meeting in East China's Qingdao city. Indian Defence Minister Rajnath Singh has slammed Pakistan at the SCO summit. Let's hear what the Indian Defence Minister had to say.
The technology used by terrorists, including drones, for cross-border smuggling of weapons and drugs. In our interconnected world, traditional borders are no longer the sole barriers against threats, and instead we face an intricate web of challenges that range from transnational terrorism and cyber attacks to hybrid warfare. These threats do not respect national boundaries, and they demand a unified response rooted in transparency, mutual trust, and collaboration. India reaffirms its resolve to fight terrorism in all its forms and manifestations.
Now we move on. At least 6 people have died from floods inundating China's Jinzhou province, as per China's state deluges in Jinzhou, classified as a southwestern province by the Chinese government, have prompted authorities to activate the highest level emergency flood response, evacuating around 80,900 people. Xinhua reported a football field in Rongjiang was submerged under 3 meters of water, and as per a resident, they were rescued from the 3rd floor of their home. Incessant rainfall caused the river to burst its banks, causing widespread waterlogging and leaving many residents stranded. The Provincial Emergency Department has allocated disaster relief items, including 30,000 bottles of drinking water and 10,000 bowls of instant noodles, to 2 counties via high-speed rail and road transport. Also in Jinzhou, rain triggered landslides which caused the collapse of part of a bridge on an expressway in Sandu County. Jeff Bezos, founder of Amazon, and his fiancée Lawrence Sanchez are set to marry in Italy this week in what many are calling the wedding of the century. The couple kicked off their pre-wedding celebrations with an Italian dinner ahead of the big day. Celebrities arrived on super yachts in Venice to join the three-day festivities, despite protests from locals who complain that the UNESCO World Heritage City is not a playground for billionaires. The couple invited around 200 guests to their multi-million-dollar celebration, which begins on June the 26th and will conclude with a private ceremony at a secret venue. Bezos proposed to Sanchez in May of 2023 during a European vacation. She recalled to Vogue how she blacked out when he presented her with a 30-carat engagement ring. The event earned the title Wedding of the Century due to its massive scale and cost, estimated between $46.5 million and $55 million. Nearly 90 private jets have landed in Venice and surrounding airports, while 30 water taxis have transported guests through the city's canals. Bezos booked several luxury hotels, including Aman Venice, Gritti Palace, Belmont Caprini Street, Regis and Hotel Danelli for the occasion. We move back over to the United States, and closing arguments are underway in the explosive federal trial of Sean Diddy Combs, who faces life in prison if convicted of racketeering and sex trafficking. Prosecutors say Combs led a criminal enterprise for decades, coercing women, bribing witnesses and paying off escorts with drugs, cash and threats. Among 34 witnesses were victims, ex-employees and a hotel guard who claims he was bribed with $100,000 in a paper bag. The defense argues Combs' relationships were consensual and accuses witnesses of seeking fame or money, highlighting messages that express affection and willingness. Jurors saw explicit messages, video of alleged sex parties and financial records detailing payments to escorts and hotels. Deliberating may begin on Monday as the world awaits the verdict in a case that has shaken the music industry. We stay in North America now. Gunmen opened fire during a religious festival in Irapuato, central Mexico, killing 11 people and injuring at least 20 amid ongoing gang violence. The attack struck during celebrations for the Nativity of John the Baptist, with bloodstains and bullet holes marking the chaotic aftermath. Victims include a 17-year-old, 8 men and 2 women. Locals rushed the wounded to hospitals in private cars. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum condemned the shooting as deplorable and confirmed an investigation is underway, calling it a confrontation without elaborating. Authorities are hunting for the perpetrators, while support is being provided to traumatized residents. The region, plagued by turf wars between Santa Rosa de Lima and Jalisco cartels, remains Mexico's deadliest state. Well, that is all we have time for, and we will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world.